Chapter 1: The Four Dimensions of Reading Fluency. Hello and welcome to the most innovative learning experience on Earth. No small feat, to be sure, and you will discover that GSU has earned this honor. Welcome. Global Sovereign University is a free school for everyone: homeschooled children, students in traditional classrooms who are hungry for better tools, and adults who never stopped wanting to learn. Subchapter 1: Understanding Accuracy, the Foundation of Fluency. If fluency were a bridge, accuracy would be the concrete under the pavement. You can decorate the railings with expression, and you can widen the lanes with speed. But if the bridge is built on misread words, it does not reliably carry meaning from the page into the mind. Accuracy is simply this: reading the words that are actually there. That sounds almost too obvious to deserve its own section. Many readers, especially adult readers, will say, "I'm accurate, I just read slowly." Teachers will say, "She knows the words, she just needs to build confidence." And sometimes that is true. But accuracy is slippery because it includes more than getting most words basically right. It includes reading them right enough, consistently enough, and automatically enough that comprehension does not have to constantly correct the reader's errors. A small example shows why. Consider the sentence, "The farmer measured the grain before storing it." If a reader says, "The farmer measured the rain," that is a single-letter substitution. The sentence still sounds grammatical. The reader may not even notice. But the meaning has changed in a way that can quietly derail comprehension. Later, when the text mentions sacks, scales, or a silo, the reader's mind feels confused, not because they can't comprehend, but because the text they think they read is not the text that was written. This is why accuracy comes first. It is not because we are perfectionists. It is because comprehension is built on the words that were truly decoded, not the words that were guessed. Accuracy is not the same thing as knowing phonics. Adult learners often carry an old wound here. They were taught, directly or indirectly, that accuracy problems mean they never learned phonics, or aren't trying. But in real readers, accuracy sits on top of multiple systems working together: letter sound knowledge, familiarity with spelling patterns, vocabulary, and the brain's growing ability to recognize words quickly as whole units. A reader might have solid phonics and still misread often because they are reading too fast for their current level of automaticity, or because they are anxious and rushing. Another reader might decode carefully and still misread because their attention keeps dropping at the ends of long words. So interesting becomes interest, and beautifully becomes beautiful. Another reader may read accurately aloud but misunderstand silently because they are skipping words or lines without noticing. When we talk about accuracy in this book, we are talking about the dependable matching of print to speech in oral reading and print to inner speech in silent reading. Accuracy is a behavior you can observe, measure, and improve without turning it into a moral issue. Accuracy errors: what they are and what they mean. Not all mistakes are equal. Some errors barely touch meaning. Others change it drastically. Some indicate a decoding weakness. Others indicate a vocabulary gap. In fluency research and classroom practice, these errors are often called miscues. The point is not to shame the reader, but to diagnose what the reading system is doing. Here are the most common kinds of accuracy miscues, with what they often signal. Substitutions: reading one word for another, e.g. grain becomes rain, or stored becomes stared. Substitutions can come from weak decoding, but they also come from guessing based on the first letter or the general shape of a word. If substitutions are frequent, the reader may be relying on prediction instead of print. Omissions: skipping words or parts of words. Measured becomes measure. Before storing becomes before store. Omissions often increase when a reader is tired or when the text has many small grammatical words. They can also point to weak tracking skills or attention that flickers under pressure. Insertions: adding words that are not there. This can happen when the reader is trying to make the sentence sound right after losing their place. It can also happen when the reader's language system is strong and fills in what it expects, even if the eyes did not confirm it. Reversals or transpositions: switching word order or letters, form for from, saw for was. In young readers, some of this is normal early development. In older readers, persistent reversals often show that the word has not been firmly mapped in memory and still requires effortful decoding. Self-corrections. The farmer measured the grain. A self-correction is not a failure. It is a sign that the reader's meaning monitoring is alive. In fact, self-correction is one of the healthiest behaviors a developing fluent reader can show because it means the mind is checking, did that make sense? The long-term goal is fewer errors, but in the short term, an increase in self-corrections can be progress. If you are teaching a child, or if you are an adult working on your own reading, this is a relief. Accuracy is not just a score, it is information. It tells you what kind of practice will help. How accurate is accurate enough for fluency? In reading instruction, accuracy is often described in percentages. When a reader reads aloud, you can calculate accuracy like this. Total words read correctly, total words 100. You do not need to obsess over the exact number, but the ranges are useful. Independent level, about 98 to 100% accuracy. The text is easy enough that the reader can practice fluency, comprehension, and enjoyment without constant repair. Instructional level, about 90 to 97% accuracy. The text is challenging but teachable. This is where guided practice, repeated reading, and modeled reading can be powerful. Frustration level, below about 90% accuracy. The reader is spending so much energy decoding that comprehension and confidence collapse. This is where many well-intentioned adults and teachers accidentally trap learners. The text looks age-appropriate, but the accuracy cost is too high. For adult learners, this can be emotionally complicated. Nobody wants baby books, but the brain does not care about dignity. It cares about repetition at the right difficulty. The solution is not to force harder text. The solution is to choose adult-appropriate content written at an accessible level, so the reader can build accuracy and automaticity without humiliation. Later chapters will show you how to find that sweet spot, accuracy and the bandwidth problem. You were introduced earlier to the central idea that will run through this whole book. The mind has limited bandwidth. When too much of that bandwidth is spent on decoding, there is not enough left for comprehension. Accuracy is part of this bandwidth story. When accuracy is weak, the reader's mind has to do emergency repairs. It must stop, reread, guess, infer, and backtrack. Sometimes the reader does not repair at all. Either way, meaning becomes fragile. The reader reaches the end of the paragraph and cannot remember what it said, not because their memory is broken, but because their attention was constantly interrupted. Accuracy reduces interruptions. It makes reading a smoother cognitive experience, which is the real purpose of fluency. A practical way to work on accuracy without getting stuck there. Accuracy improves fastest when it is practiced in context, with feedback, and with texts that are not too hard. That is why repeated reading has such a strong evidence base and why it will get a full chapter later. But you can start with a simple routine now, even before you learn the formal protocols. 1. Choose a short passage that is easy enough to read with some comfort. If you are missing more than one word out of 10, the passage is too hard for accuracy work. 2. Read it aloud once, slowly enough to be right. Give yourself permission to be careful. Speed is not the goal yet. 3. Mark the words you missed, hesitated on, or guessed. If you are using Geno or any tool that can highlight text as it is read, use that feature to keep your eyes locked to the line. 4. Go back to the missed words and do small repairs. Look at the whole word. Say it. Use it in a sentence. If it is a longer word, break it into parts. If it is a vocabulary issue, look up the meaning. If it is a spelling pattern you do not know, write 2 or 3 similar words. 5. Read the passage again, aiming for smoother accuracy, not faster speed. This is the quiet discipline that fluent readers build, the habit of caring whether the word is right. Accuracy is not the finish line. It is the floor. A final, important honesty. Perfect accuracy does not guarantee comprehension. A reader can say every word correctly and still not know what the passage means. But without accuracy, everything else becomes harder. Rate becomes frantic, prosody becomes fake, and stamina collapses because the work is too heavy. In the next section, we will talk about rate and why speed is not an enemy of understanding when it grows out of accuracy. For now, the goal is simple and sturdy. Read the words that are there. so your mind is free to do what it was always meant to do with print, which is to think. Subchapter 2, Reading Rate, when speed supports comprehension. Once accuracy is sturdy, a new question appears almost immediately, especially for adult learners. If I can read the words correctly, why does reading still feel so hard? Often the answer is rate, not speed as a bragging right, not speed as a race. Rate is the pace at which your brain can move through print while still holding the meaning together. This is where fluency instruction often goes wrong in both directions. Some readers have been pushed to go faster before they were accurate enough, and they learn to skim the page with their eyes while their minds quietly dropped the thread of meaning. Other readers have been taught, implicitly or explicitly, that speed is suspicious and that careful reading must always be slow reading. They become so cautious that every sentence is handled like a puzzle, and the brain never gets the relief of smooth automatic movement. In both cases, comprehension suffers, not because the reader is incapable of understanding, but because the pace is working against the mind. Rate is the when of decoding. Accuracy is reading the right words. Rate is how quickly those words arrive in the mind. The mind does not experience a text one word at a time, the way a finger points to words. The mind tries to build a message. It holds a few ideas in working memory, connects them, updates them, and predicts what is coming next. That process is fragile. If the words come too slowly, working memory has to keep the beginning of the sentence alive for too long. If the words come too quickly, working memory gets flooded with sounds that never quite become meaning. Consider a simple sentence again. The farmer measured the grain before storing it. When the sentence is read at a workable pace, your mind keeps farmer, measured, and grain together long enough to build a clean picture, a person weighing grain before putting it away. But when reading is extremely slow, the mind can lose the first part before the end arrives. The reader may accurately decode the farmer measured, and then, by the time they reach before storing it, the whole thing feels oddly disconnected. Many adult learners describe this experience as, I read it, but it didn't stick. It is not laziness. It is timing. Rate is about keeping language intact. It is the pace that allows phrases, not just words, to land in the mind as meaningful units. Why slower is not always better. People sometimes give the advice, just slow down and you'll understand. That advice is helpful when a reader is rushing and making substitutions or omissions, like grain becoming rain. Slowing down can rescue accuracy, and accuracy rescues meaning. But for a reader who is already accurate, slowing down further can backfire. Here is why. Comprehension is not a separate skill that starts after decoding ends. Comprehension is built during reading, in real time. The brain is constantly doing small acts of integration, connecting pronouns to nouns, attaching modifiers to the right ideas, noticing cause and effect, and tracking what is new information versus repeated information. When the pace is excessively slow, the brain has to work harder to keep the language alive long enough to integrate it. A sentence that should feel like one thought gets experienced at 10 disconnected parts. This can make reading feel exhausting, even when the words are correct. Adult learners often recognize this immediately when they compare two experiences: reading a familiar text aloud with some natural flow versus reading a dense, unfamiliar paragraph word by word. In the first, the mind has room to think. In the second, the mind is trapped in the mechanics of getting to the next word. So we need a more honest slogan than slow down. The goal is to be slow enough to be accurate and fast enough to keep meaning connected. Rate is not the same as rushing. It is important to separate rate from hurry. Rushing is what happens when speed becomes the goal and the reader's eyes run ahead of the mind. Rushing increases substitutions, omissions, and skipped endings. It also encourages a dangerous habit: reading without noticing whether the sentence makes sense. You may reach the end of a paragraph quickly, but the mind is empty because it never had time to construct meaning. Healthy rate feels different. Healthy rate feels like movement with control. It feels like the mind is riding on top of the words rather than dragging them one by one. The reader is still monitoring meaning. Self-corrections can still happen, but they are quick, clean repairs, not constant breakdowns. A practical way to notice the difference is to ask a simple question after a few lines. What did that just say? If you cannot answer, you are probably rushing. If you can answer, but reading feels like pushing a heavy cart, you are probably too slow for your current level of automaticity and need practice that builds smoother recognition. The three rates inside one reader. Most readers, especially developing readers, do not have one single reading speed. They have at least three. There is the careful decoding rate, slow, deliberate, accurate, used when the text is hard or when the reader is anxious about being wrong. This rate is useful. It is a tool. It is how you get through new vocabulary, long words, and unfamiliar topics. There is the fluent comprehension rate, the pace where accuracy stays high and meaning stays connected. This is the rate we are aiming to build for most everyday reading. And there is the performance rush rate, faster than comprehension can support, often triggered by timing, embarrassment, or the feeling of being evaluated. This is the rate that makes readers look more fluent for a moment while understanding collapses. One of the most helpful realizations for both children and adults is that developing fluency means expanding the middle rate. It does not mean eliminating careful reading. It means you need to rely on careful reading less often because more words and patterns become automatic. What good rate looks like in the real world. People sometimes want a single number, like a magic words per minute target. Numbers can be useful, but only if you treat them as descriptive rather than moral. The truth is that rate changes with genre, purpose, and difficulty. You should read a legal document differently than you read a mystery novel. You should read a poem differently than you read a set of instructions. Still, a few realities are steady. First, if a reader is accurate but extremely slow, comprehension often drops because working memory is overloaded. This is especially common in children who are stuck in word-by-word reading and adults who decode adequately but find reading mentally exhausting. They can get it sentence by sentence if you quiz them, but the whole passage never becomes a coherent message. Second, if a reader is fast but inaccurate, comprehension is fragile and often built on guessing. The mind is not being fed the real text. It is being fed a distorted version, and later confusion is almost guaranteed. Third, improvement in rate that comes from automaticity usually improves comprehension because it frees mental bandwidth. Improvement in rate that comes from pressure or drill often harms comprehension because it trains the reader to ignore meaning monitoring. You can hear the difference when someone reads aloud. At a healthy rate, the reading sounds like language. At an unhealthy rate, it sounds like either choppy decoding or breathless racing. How rate grows without turning into a speed contest. Rate improves best as a side effect of the right kind of practice. You do not need to chase speed. You need to chase smoothness, accuracy, and repeated exposure at an appropriate level. This connects directly to the routine you began in the previous section. You chose an easy enough passage. You read it aloud slowly enough to be right. You marked the words that caused trouble. You repaired them. Then you read again, aiming for smoother accuracy. Here's what happens if you repeat that process over days and weeks with well-chosen text. Your brain starts recognizing more words instantly, not by guessing, but by solid memory for spelling patterns and word forms. The pauses shrink. The need to sound out disappears more often. The result is a naturally faster pace, but the real gift is not speed. The gift is cognitive space. That cognitive space is what fluent readers experience as I can think while I read. A simple self-check. Do I have room to understand? You can assess rate without a stopwatch. After reading a paragraph, ask yourself, 1. Could I tell someone in one sentence what that paragraph was about? 2. Did I notice when something did not make sense? 3. Did I feel like I was carrying the meaning forward, or did it evaporate between sentences? If you cannot summarize, something is off. If you never notice confusion, something is off. If meaning evaporates, something is off. The solution is not always to slow down. Sometimes it is to choose a slightly easier text so you can practice at a more natural pace. Sometimes it is to reread the same passage until it becomes smooth enough that meaning can ride on top of it. Sometimes it is good to listen to a fluent model and read along so your brain learns what connected language feels like on the page. Later chapters will give you formal protocols for exactly that, especially repeated reading and modeled reading. For now, hold the central idea. Rate is not speed for its own sake. Rate is the pace that keeps meaning intact. Accuracy is the floor. Rate is the moving walkway. When accuracy is dependable, rate becomes the moving walkway that carries you through sentences without exhausting your mind. It is the difference between stepping over every tile and simply walking. It is also the difference between reading that feels like work and reading that feels like thinking. And this is why the Fluency Bridge has more than one lane. Accuracy keeps you on the bridge. Rate helps you cross it in time to remember what you saw along the way. In the next section, we will add two dimensions that turn rate into real fluency rather than mere speed. Prosody, the music and phrasing that reveals comprehension, and stamina, the endurance to stay fluent long enough for a whole chapter, not just a paragraph. Subchapter 3, Prosody and Stamina, Expression and Endurance in Reading. Rate gives you movement, but movement alone is not yet fluency. Many readers can learn to move through words faster and still sound robotic, still lose meaning inside long sentences, and still feel exhausted after a few pages. That is where the last two dimensions of fluency come in: prosody and stamina. Prosody is the music of reading, the phrasing, pausing, emphasis, and intonation that make print sound like language. Stamina is the endurance to sustain accurate, appropriately paced, meaningful reading long enough for comprehension to accumulate across paragraphs, pages, and chapters. If accuracy is the floor and rate is the moving walkway, prosody is the steering and suspension system that keeps the ride smooth enough for understanding. Stamina is the fuel tank. Prosody is not decoration. It is visible comprehension. Many people treat expressive reading as a performance skill, something nice for read-aloud time but irrelevant to real comprehension. That is a mistake. Prosody is not a fancy add-on. It is one of the clearest outward signs that a reader is building meaning while they read. Consider again our earlier sentence. The farmer measured the grain before storing it. A reader with good accuracy but weak prosody might read it in a flat, word-by-word way. The farmer measured the grain before storing it. Technically correct, but the mind may not have grouped the ideas. The sentence can feel like beads on a string rather than one thought. A reader with stronger prosody will naturally group the phrase measured the grain as a unit, and they will treat before storing it as a meaningful time relationship. You can hear it. A slight lift in the voice at the right moment, a small pause that matches the structure, a gentle stress on the words that carry the meaning. That stress is not acting. It is the brain revealing what it understands. This is why prosody belongs in a book about fluency for both children and adults. It is not about sounding like an audiobook narrator. It is about reading in a way that keeps language intact, the same way rate keeps language intact. Prosody is one of the ways the brain prevents the meaning evaporates between sentences problem we talked about earlier. What prosody is made of? Prosody has several parts, and you do not need to master them all at once. It helps just to know what you are listening for in yourself or a learner. Phrasing. Fluent readers read in meaningful chunks, not in isolated words. They group words into phrases that make sense. For example, before storing it is a phrase. The farmer is a phrase. When a reader's phrasing improves, their reading often becomes easier immediately because the brain gets to process language in larger units. Pausing. Pauses are not random breaks for breath. In fluent reading, pauses match punctuation and meaning. A comma usually signals a small pause, but more importantly, it signals that the sentence structure is doing something, adding information, setting up a contrast, or listing ideas. When pauses are placed well, comprehension improves because the reader is recognizing the relationships between ideas. Emphasis. In spoken language, we naturally stress the important words. We do not stress every word equally. Print is asking the reader to do the same thing internally. If everything is read with equal weight, the meaning becomes foggy. If a reader can learn to slightly stress key nouns and verbs, comprehension becomes clearer because the sentence has a shape. Intonation. This is the rise and fall of the voice. Questions usually rise. Statements often fall. A sentence that continues on to the next line may carry a rising or unfinished tone. Intonation is another way the brain signals, this thought is continuing or this thought is complete. All of these are easier for the brain when decoding is more automatic. That is why prosody often lags behind accuracy. A reader can be accurate and even moderately fast, yet still read like a machine because so much attention is going to word recognition that the reader cannot also manage phrasing and expression. That is not a character flaw. It is bandwidth. The mind is busy keeping the words right, so the music goes missing. A key honesty for adult learners: prosody can feel awkward at first. Adults who are working on fluency often avoid reading aloud because it feels childish or embarrassing. They may also avoid expressive reading because it feels like pretending. If that describes you, it is worth saying plainly, prosody is not about putting on a voice. It is about allowing your voice to follow the meaning that is already in the sentence. A helpful mindset is to treat prosody as meaning support, not performance. You're not trying to impress anyone. You are trying to help your own brain keep the message connected. If you read aloud and it sounds flat, that does not prove you do not understand. It may simply prove that the decoding effort is still high. But if you practice prosody intentionally, you often get a surprising benefit. You understand more because you are forcing your attention to land on relationships between ideas. Expression becomes a comprehension tool. One simple way to practice prosody without feeling theatrical is to read as if you were explaining the sentence to one person sitting across from you. Not acting, communicating. You will naturally pause in more sensible places. Prosody also guards against a dangerous kind of speed. In the previous section, we separated a healthy rate from rushing. Prosody is one of the best protections against rushing because you cannot truly read with meaningful phrasing if your eyes are sprinting ahead of your mind. A reader who has learned to race for words per minute may sound fast but empty, and their comprehension may collapse. Prosody pushes back. It forces the reader to treat sentences as units of meaning, not as strings of words to be conquered. In this sense, prosody is part of the book's central refusal. We are not teaching read faster. We are teaching read smoothly enough that your mind has room to understand. Stamina is the hidden dimension that explains, I can read, but I can't read for long. If prosody is the music, stamina is the ability to keep playing. Many readers can produce a few fluent sentences and then fall apart. They start well, and then accuracy drops, rate becomes uneven, prosody becomes monotone, and comprehension becomes patchy. This is not uncommon in children in grades 2 through 6 who have learned to decode but have not built automaticity. It is also extremely common in adults who can get through an email or a short article but feel drained by a chapter. Stamina is the endurance to sustain all the other dimensions, to stay accurate, maintain a supportive pace, and keep meaning alive through prosody, not just for one paragraph, but for long enough to build understanding. Stamina problems have a recognizable feeling. The reader may say, my eyes keep jumping, or I lose my place, or I have to reread the same line. They may report headaches, heavy fatigue, or the sense that their brain shuts down after 10 minutes. Teachers may observe that the reader begins to guess more, skip endings, or stop self-correcting. The meaning monitoring we praised earlier starts to disappear, not because the reader suddenly became careless, but because they are running out of cognitive fuel. Why stamina breaks down? Stamina can break down for several reasons, and it matters which one is happening. First, the text may be too hard. Remember, the accuracy ranges from the first section: independent, instructional, frustration. A reader trying to build stamina cannot do it in frustration-level text. It is like trying to build running endurance while carrying a heavy backpack uphill. The effort is too high. The system collapses. Second, the reader may be reading at a pace that does not match their automaticity. Some readers push themselves to maintain a normal speed and burn out quickly. Others read so slowly and carefully that it becomes exhausting in a different way. Because working memory is strained and attention frays. Stamina is not just about time. It is about the cost per sentence. Third, the reader may not have enough practice sustaining attention on print. In a world of short content and constant interruption, sustained reading is its own skill. Wide reading, which you will meet later in this book, is one of the most powerful ways to build stamina because it trains the mind to stay with a text long enough for comprehension to deepen. Fourth, the reader may have underlying issues that are not reading problems in the usual sense. Anxiety during timed reading, poor sleep, uncorrected vision issues, or simple stress. Adult learners in particular may be doing their practice after a full day of work, when their mental energy is already drained. Stamina is affected by the whole person. How to build prosody and stamina without turning reading into theater or punishment. The most reliable way to build both prosody and stamina is to practice in conditions where the brain can succeed. Start with text that is easy enough. This is not a downgrade. It is strategy. If you choose a passage where accuracy is high, the mind has bandwidth left to work on phrasing and expression. If you choose a passage where you are missing more than one word out of 10, prosody will vanish because survival decoding takes over. Then use short, repeated practice. You have already begun a simple routine. Read aloud slowly enough to be right, mark trouble spots, repair, and read again, aiming for smoother accuracy. Now we add a small upgrade. On the second and third readings, aim to make it sound like you are speaking in meaningful phrases. Notice punctuation. Slightly stress the words that carry the message. Do not force drama, force clarity. As you repeat a passage, something important happens. The decoding load shrinks. The mind stops spending so much energy on what is this word and begins to spend more energy on what does this sentence mean. That shift is exactly what we mean by reading at the speed of thought. For stamina, use a simple, honest structure. Read in manageable intervals and then extend them. For example, an adult learner might start with 2 minutes of reading aloud, then a short pause to summarize what was read in one sentence, then 2 more minutes. Over days, those 2-minute intervals become 5, then 10, then 15. Children can do the same with shorter starting intervals if needed. The goal is not to prove toughness. The goal is to train the system to stay fluent long enough for ideas to accumulate. A final self-check that ties all 4 dimensions together. Accuracy asks, did I read the words that are there? Rate asks, did I move fast enough to keep meaning connected but not so fast that I lost it? Prosody asks, did I read in a way that reflects the sentence structure and meaning? Stamina asks, could I sustain that kind of reading long enough to actually understand the text as a whole? If you can answer yes to all 4, you are not just reading, you are thinking in print. And that is what fluency really is. Reading smoothly enough that your mind has room to understand, not just for a moment, but for as long as the text requires. Every person on earth is born with an American spirit, an untamed yearning for a better tomorrow. Dr. Jean, a constant. No 2 people learn the same way, so there is no cookie-cutter approach here. For every book, GSU gives you 6 ways in, and all 6 are free. First, a video, a short narrated walkthrough of Chapter 1, the first of 12 chapters. Second, a podcast, this one where you can hear all of Chapter 1 read aloud. Third, a game built on repetition and scorekeeping so that learning actually feels like play. Return anytime, day or night, and pick up right where you left off. Fourth, a free digital copy of the entire book to download and keep, free of course. Fifth, your own AI tutor. His name is Gino. You can speak to him and hear him answer. A patient teacher, available any hour of the day or night. And sixth, certification. Along a path we call Trifurcation Road, any learner can earn a Comprehension certification, also free. For now, GSU speaks English, Spanish, and simplified Chinese. Book sales on Amazon and the generosity of our donors will carry us toward all 32 languages, so that anyone, anywhere in the world can count on Global Sovereign University for real-world education.